So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about initial diagnosis and how you received that news and how you initially coped with it. So Cheryl, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you initially coped with your diagnosis?
Sure. So my story is that I was initially diagnosed with breast cancer of the left breast at my 6-week postpartum visit after having my third child. So I had a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 6-week-old at the time of my diagnosis. Initially I thought I may have just had a breast infection, which commonly happens during pregnancy. And with my medical background, I thought that typically breast cancer doesn't hurt, so it wasn't really on my radar. I thought I'd go to my postpartum visit and be told I needed some antibiotics and I'd go home. Right after my visit, my OBGYN gave me the look that we need to get an ultrasound done and then a mammogram. And so you can imagine being hormonal during that time, having 3 young kids. There were already a whirlwind of emotions that were going on, and I expected to go back to work pretty soon after that. And so my husband and I were already shocked with having young kids and this whirlwind life we were having, but it was really hard to put into words what we were feeling. I think we were silent for the initial part of my diagnosis, but also we have a hope and a belief that we could make it through things, and we've been through some tough things, so I think that that helped us through the initial time, but we were scared.
I bet. Thank you. Deb, what of that resonates with you? What was your initial coping with your diagnosis?
I was scared, but more so I was angry because I first went in for a lump in 2016 and was completely disregarded by the medical practitioner that was on call. I was told I was too young, there's no history of breast cancer, and just I felt really dismissed. So when I came in 2 years later and was diagnosed de novo Mets, I was pretty angry, but after that I kind of had an avoidant attitude about it. I really didn't want to deal with breast cancer. I don't have time for it.
Understood. Sheila, what about you? What about your initial coping? What is your initial diagnosis story?
So I was diagnosed in July 2015. I had a lump on my breast, and I had been to my OBGYN, I had been to my primary physician, I had had a mammogram earlier that year, and they said everything's good, nothing to be concerned about, but over time that lump started to hurt. And I had switched OBGYNs, and when I expressed my concerns, she looked at me very serious and says, I am going to be honest with you, this is something that concerns me quite a bit. She ordered the initial set of imaging, etc. And I was sitting in the lobby of a hall where my daughter was going to summer camp, cello camp. And she was 12 at the time, my son was 15. And I got the call while she was playing the cello that I had invasive ductal carcinoma. So when I was diagnosed, it was de novo. By the time they had diagnosed me, it had already spread to the liver and to the nodes under my right arm. There was shock. Yes, my mom had had breast cancer, so I thought it was actually just genetic. It was not. But for me, the way I assimilated it, one, I'm the main provider in the family, and I'm a woman of faith. So I understood that whatever was coming my way, I was going to be provided with the tools, the strength, and the support that I needed. So the way I coped with it, I just clung to family, to friends, and my faith. And the way I explain it to the kids is, here's what I have. Yes, it's serious, but we'll treat it like a flu. We know what we have. We're just going to look for good professional care, and then we'll do as they told, and then we're going to do the best we can with what we have.
Thanks, Sheila. And we'll definitely be talking more during this session about how to communicate with children. That's an important issue for many of our panelists. So I want to turn to Thomasina, who was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, if I'm calculating correctly, 18 years ago. Wow. Thomasina, what did your doctor explain to you about metastatic breast cancer? Did your healthcare team help you at all to be able to cope?
I believe at that time, in 2005, there wasn't like a great deal of information on it. And he told me pretty much whatever he could, and he gave me resources to look up information. It just wasn't really that much information at that time.
Did others find that to be the case as well? Did you also have difficulty finding resources about metastatic breast cancer? I see you nodding, Deb.
Yeah, nobody gave me any. Yeah.
I remember at the time, for me, I go to a comprehensive cancer center, and they're always good in giving you all information about what they have. So I remember like the guide with information about MBC, about their programs, their support programs, and support for families. But I was not exposed to any of the great resources that I, almost 8 years in, I know are out there, and I know there's a lot more. So organizations like LBBC and many others where, you don't have to go through this alone. And even though for some it may sound like information overload, my opinion, if it's better for you to be presented at diagnosis with the tools and the resources so that you, on your terms, on your own time when you're ready, can go and look for the information. Otherwise, you feel like you're wandering, and then you really feel like you're alone because you just don't know where to start.
Yeah.
I have some background as far as being a healthcare professional, so I would say that the information that I did know wasn't necessarily the most positive information. And so in my case, a lot of people would expect that I would know a lot of the numbers, but I didn't want to know the numbers just because of my medical background. I didn't want to know some of the more negative aspects of what could possibly happen with having stage 4 cancer. So I sort of was in hiding for a long time before finding out resources such as Living Beyond Breast Cancer, which I'm so grateful for because they give us a positive spin to something that can seem so dreary and dark when you're given numbers and you're not given faces like the ones in the audience that have hope and joy and have families and things beyond cancer to consider.
Yes, well, you're so much more than numbers, and that's why we have programs like this to be able to discuss these issues. Now, Cheryl, you had a special situation as a physician. You also had a very close friend who's a physician, and I wonder if she was able to help you with that initial coping.
She was. My medical school friend, Dr. Erica Stringer-Reeser, I have to give a lot of credit to, and some of you may actually see her sometimes at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Conference because she's very involved with them. But after we received the phone call that I had invasive ductal carcinoma, one of the first thoughts my husband and I had was to call my friend Erica, and luckily she had moved back from Chicago to Birmingham, Alabama. And as soon as she got off of work from her job being an oncologist, she came to my house and took me upstairs as my husband watched the kids downstairs and gave me an exam upstairs in one of our bedrooms and basically told me everything I was in store for, straight to the point, no chaser. And of course, tears were flowing, but I definitely appreciated that I had a relationship so close with someone who could give me the facts and information. Even as uncomfortable as it was, it made it better to know that someone was behind me with some experience in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering, Sheila, for example, when did you start to really understand what you were facing? At what point, and how did you begin kind of coping with the diagnosis of metastatic breast cancer?
I think one point in time, very early on, I had asked my oncologist about the numbers. And I heard the whole survival spiel and, maybe went in this way and went out the other. And for me, it's like, okay, I am not a number. But I think being aware was important to me. I'll be honest, I don't remember other than just kind of the very high level, here's what it is, here is what it means, and here is your subtypes. I really don't remember me going knee deep on understanding anything other than, okay, which meds I'll be on, what are the side effects, what to look for. And for me specifically, I didn't really have many of the harsh side effects that many of us experience. So for me, I was still able to live that, I call it normal life. And I didn't really feel the need to look and explore. The longer that I had the blessing to live on, and I would tell you probably late 2019, early 2020, and remember I was diagnosed in July 2015, I felt the urge to start reaching out to others that could understand things that I wanted to say, things that I was feeling. And it wasn't until then that I started finding other organizations where I could read more about here is what it is, here's how it's being treated, here's where you go for information, support groups, etc. So for me, I really didn't feel the need to do it early on. But like I said, I mean, I think you look when you're ready for it, and I think I did it at the right time when I felt I could do a lot more and get more engaged on different causes and organizations to help me cope and also help others.
Deb, did you want to speak to that as well?
I do. I didn't have the urge to reach out to others. And you were asking if we understood what it was, and I did not. I was struggling with my mental health. I suffer from bipolar disorder, so I was in a manic episode when I was diagnosed, and the mania had me thinking I could just conquer it and, I'll be the first one to beat metastatic breast cancer. And after doing 16 Taxols, and, the oncologist said, okay, we'll see you in 3 weeks. I said, I don't get to ring the bell. And that's when I knew. So it took several months for me to realize what it meant. And I regret not having resources. No one told me. I barely found LBBC last year. I had no resources. I didn't know a single person with metastatic breast cancer until last year, met Kathleen. So I think, in retrospect, I wish I could have had support early on. I wish someone could have came up to me, a patient navigator, an advocate, and reached out to me. And I wish that my oncologist would have heard me when I said, I don't have the capacity in this state that I'm in to properly understand the information that is being given to me.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a really important point because it's such an emotionally difficult time when you're first diagnosed. To be able to absorb all that medical information is really, really challenging if someone can't help you walk through it together. So how has your coping style changed over time? I think I want to start with Thomasina with this. If you could talk a little bit about how you think about it differently over time since your diagnosis.
When I was first diagnosed, I didn't want to really hear a lot of information as well. I didn't really seek too much, but then I read something on the internet, which I shouldn't have did, and it said that most people with metastatic breast cancer die within 5 years. So I thought I was going to die. I was like counting the years, and then finally, I think by the 3rd year, I started getting more information and signing up with Fashion Fights Cancer and Cancer Care, Susan G. Komen, and then later LBBC, which gave me much more information about the metastatic breast cancer because it wasn't a lot out, but as the years went by, it got better, through research and more information. But I coped that the first year was really, I didn't believe it. I was like blocking it out. Like, okay, he said I have cancer. I would go get treatment. I had three weeks on and 1 week off. And then I would go to the doctor. On my day off, I would do treatment, go back to work, because I do healthcare as well. And so that's how I coped, by overworking, until I finally got tired where I had to deal with it. And now I accept it. I find a lot of ways to do things to help me cope. Like I do art. I write poetry, I write short stories, and I'm active with a lot of Moving for Life, and I go to a lot of other organizations.
Sheila, you had talked a little bit about your faith being important to you in coping with metastatic breast cancer, and there's a question that's come in. After my diagnosis, I lost my faith in God, and for those of you who have faith, how did you hold on to your faith and beliefs? So I thought you could address that.
Of course. So for me, I saw it as a wake-up call to take a look at my spiritual side and get that strengthened. So you're one whole person. So your diagnosis, yes, it's a lot of physical, but there's a lot of mental. But the way I took it was more of this is a wake-up call. I probably need to just pay a little bit more attention. I did not ever feel the need to say, why me, in an angry way, but just trying to understand better and listen, what can I do with this? It's in here for a reason. God help me understand what does it mean for me and how can I help others. I remember a year prior in my church, they had a retreat for women. It was an overnight retreat. And at the time, I decided not to register because I was too busy. I worked full-time as a project manager. I had, again, 2 teenagers, my husband, and after my diagnosis, that same retreat came about, and I said, you know what? I am going this year. Up until then, I had been going to the same church for years, and I felt like a stranger. I'm Puerto Rican, and I had switched churches from the Spanish-speaking one to the English one, so my kids could better understand what they were being taught. And I just felt out of place. I didn't feel welcome. Had nothing to do with them. It's just a different place. And after that, I remember being able to go to church, get immersed in different ministries, felt like I had a family, a support network. When there was a scan, there's a group chat where they would just be praying for me. What do you need? So for me, it was more a spiritual awakening, a kind of a reminder that there's that spiritual side you still need to cultivate. And when there's anxiety, when there's questions, when I feel, especially when I see so many others that are having such a different journey than I am, I just remember he's there for me. And just, there's always something that comes that helps me feel more at ease and gives me the strength to just go through things when typically, normally, you just think there's no way I could possibly work through it.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about coping in this sort of initial period, and I want to talk a little bit about your first treatment and when you selected your first treatment. So Cheryl, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you selected your first treatment and how it felt once you made that decision.
I really did have a trust in my healthcare providers and their recommendations. And so my first chemo treatment, I did belong to a trial, but I did get the standard of care for triple-negative breast cancer. And so I do recall that initial treatment being fearful, of course, and even with a medical background, being afraid of what was to come. But also wanting to be steadfast, knowing that I'd seen people that had been through tough things before. So I had a fearful confidence that I could make it through the treatments. I think it's also important that when you're in those settings, you see that there's a sense of community even in those scary times. There are nurses that care for you and are there to help you through the tough parts and to explain what may happen. And then you see other folks that are handling chemo better or worse than you, and I think that too can put things into a perspective. And for me, it gave me, similar to what Sheila was saying, you kind of hone into your spiritual beliefs and your grit. So I feel like it was a scary time, but also one that I knew was necessary. But I also wasn't looking forward to it because my hair was going to fall out right before my birthday and all of that stuff.
How about you, Deb?
I did not want treatment. I fought against it. My best friend came with me to the appointment, and they had to talk me into accepting that, I was going to have to do Taxol. I wasn't thoroughly being given any other options. I was told this is the option for your situation. And I didn't like that. I wanted to take a natural approach. I believe cannabis is medicine, so I was convinced, because remember, I was in a bipolar episode, that I could just do it the natural way. I'm going to get rid of it. But thankfully, I did some research on the oncologist. I knew that she was the best one, and I reluctantly accepted. And I had a bold wake-up call after my first treatment. I was a single mom at the time, living on my own, just my daughter, and she wasn't home after the first night. And I told all my friends, I'm fine. I don't need anybody here. Until the middle of the night, I fainted on my way to the bathroom, and there was no one there to help me. And I knew, okay, I need help. I'm going to have to do this treatment now. And at that point, I probably should have looked up more information about what I was doing, but it was too much. It was just too much.
How did you get the help that you needed, Deb?
So I called my brother. He lives in another state, New Mexico, and he sent his wife, my sister-in-law, to come and help me. She quit her job, and she moved to Utah, and she stayed with me for 2 months to help me with my 4-year-old at the time. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
It can be really hard to ask for help.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, I think it's really courageous that you were able to pick up the phone and ask for help. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to that, to a moment when you realized that you needed to ask for help? Thomasina, is there something you wanted to add
It
there?
took me a while because I'm quite sure, like the other ladies, I'm very independent. So it took me a long time to ask for help from like support groups and resources. I think like maybe 5 years later. And that's when I started realizing that I need to ask, because the more help I asked for, the more help I received. And my family was amazing. My 2 daughters and 2 grandsons. Even the youngest one, he understood, because I explained it to him what it was as well. And then he was always watching me to see what I'm doing to make sure I'm okay, asking me, are you all right? And I just allowed myself to let people help me. Not too much, but a little bit. Even like the social worker, I wouldn't go see the social worker. My doctor would advise me to go see her, and it took me a long time. But finally, I realized I couldn't do it by myself, and I had to let other people help me and stop being stubborn. So I did.
I'm stubborn too.
I had major wake-up calls just because, as you all know, financial strains happen. And for many of us, we are the independent women that are the givers. And when graduations come around, we are able to give money to kids and do all those wonderful things. But when you go through something as drastic as having stage 4 cancer, financial strains happen. And, you know, we have to be grateful for things like Facebook and websites that sometimes allow us to open up a little bit, because just with one tiny comment of saying I'm struggling to one person who was a fellow Black female physician, she rallied the troops. She got a group of Black women physicians to, she made them aware of what was going on with my situation, and they said, you don't have to be ashamed. You can rely on us and we'll help you. And I'm just so grateful for people that stood in the gap even in times when I didn't want to speak up. And so it's really nice when people can see that need even beyond you saying you have a need. I'm really grateful for that.
Community.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Sheila to share a story about you selecting your first treatment, because in preparing for this panel, you talked a little bit about what led you to get a second opinion. So could you please share that story?
I'll start by saying that typically when, and you probably have heard this, Hispanic families, you go to the doctor, the family doctor you've seen since you're like 3. They tell you what you have, and you go pick up the whatever medication they tell you, and you take it, no questions asked. I went first to my local oncologist. Later, I learned the difference between specialist and generalist. He was a general oncologist. He did all the genetic testing, all the, so that's how I learned I was, hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative. There was no genetic mutation. But his recommendation was to put me on chemo right away. So I was a day shy of getting a port and getting chemo. I had already lined up my second opinion because I had heard, at least that much I heard, just go get a second opinion at a comprehensive cancer center. She was a young doctor, she was a specialist, and she begged to differ. She told me, I do not think you should start chemo right away. You're otherwise healthy. I was 44 at the time. And she said, at some point in time with your metastatic diagnosis, you may need chemo, but I don't think you need to start there. That's too harsh. So her suggestion was to put me on a hormone blocker and on a CDK4/6 inhibitor. And then the next thing she did shocked me. She's like, what's the name of your other oncologist and his phone number? I would like to talk to him. I'm like, really? So doctors talk to each other about a patient even though they're in different practices. And that's a good sign for me of a good doctor. If you have a doctor that does not share that, you probably want to reevaluate that relationship. For me, I learned the value of, one, always ask the questions and then just look for a different perspective. I don't know where I would have been if I had gone with the chemo option. I was able to go onto that treatment. I've been on that line of treatment ever since. I was without evidence of disease about a year later. Between September and December, which is when I started my treatment, I would be feeling my tumor on my breast shrinking. So for me, I think I learned very early on why it matters to request that second opinion. And just get a second, a third, or a fourth. There's nothing wrong. The more information, the more empowered you are. And I think we've all learned with this diagnosis, you just can't rely on others to make the decision for you or know what's best for you. If you know that you want to keep working and you do not want to do X, Y, Z, you need to make those known to your doctor. At the time, I didn't know all those considerations, but I'm just very thankful that I had a doctor that stood up for me and actually gave me the choice and told me that, you know, you could go either this way or this way. And she said, if you want to go with your other doctor, that's perfectly fine with me as well.
Thanks for sharing that. And I also wanted to come back to you, Cheryl, because you mentioned that for your first treatment, you elected to do a clinical trial.
Yes.
Would you share how you decided to do that and what the experience was like?
Well, there were different parts of my brain that were battling whether or not to do a clinical trial. So there's this physician mind that believes in the hope of science, and I love science. And I know that clinical trials can be helpful not only for the person involved, but potentially I would be helpful to other people by doing the trial. But then there's the black woman part of me that's from Alabama and knows about Tuskegee experiments, and I could hear my grandmother in my head and other old folks saying, no, don't do that. They just want to experiment on you and test you. But ultimately, I love God and I love science, and I know that love is healing, and I know that there were people like friends that were involved in my care and that they wouldn't present things to me that would be harmful. And I also knew that I have choices and I could back out at any time if I wanted to as well. But having triple negative breast cancer, there aren't many options in terms of what will work. And so I was down to give it a try and give it a shot. And truthfully, in my case, chemotherapy was not helpful. My tumor did not respond to chemo. And so I had to end my chemotherapy session early and go forward with my mastectomy. But I would still do the trial again. I think it's important for us to think about not only ourselves, but others. And even with that no that may have happened with my experience, there may be a yes for someone else, and there may be a yes for me with that as well for the future. And that's what I'm hopeful for.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you for doing the clinical trial. I want to talk a little bit about progression, since it's something that so many of you face. For those who had a progression, can you talk a little bit emotionally about the feeling of facing that and having to make a treatment change? Thomasina?
Okay, so I was diagnosed first in 2005, and I had a recurrence in 2008 in my spine. And it felt like, I was saying to myself, like, if I was gonna get a second tumor, why didn't somebody tell me? Or maybe, I guess, you know, I would have liked to kind of like know that it can, even though the rest of it was under control, it could, you know, progress. So when it did progress, then the same doctor, because I had the same oncologist for 18 years, and he told me, he switched the treatment over to Flazerdex, and that started working on that, and then it came back again the third time, another progression. So I had like 2 progressions, recurrences, and it's scary every time it comes back, but then a good part to me is that I'm not afraid of it coming back anymore. Like, if it comes back, it comes back. It's nothing, I can't really control it. However, I'm ready to deal with it the way I deal with the rest, and just know that there's hope as long as you have treatment and clinical trials and research. And I'm not really afraid of it recurring anymore, so.
Thanks for sharing that. Now, Cheryl, your the chemotherapy was not effective for you, so you had to make another treatment decision. And how did you do that?
Well, as I've learned through this process, a lot of us have this idea that cancer is pink and pretty, and people get over it. And so when I initially was diagnosed, I had this hope that I would be done and not have any more issues to deal with. But probably about a year after my initial diagnosis was when I started having symptoms that let me know that I had a stage 4 issue, a brain tumor. But I'm sorry, what was the question again?
That's
Rainfall?
okay. You were talking.
Y'all understand, right?
You were talking a little bit about the emotions of having the
Yeah,
progression.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So I have 3 kids too. So and ADD. But I will say that the emotions were different in that, okay, yeah, I thought I would get over this pink and pretty breast cancer. It's done. And then it comes and it's in your brain and it's like, okay, it's not even in like a cute place. It's in my brain. It's in my brain. Like, how am I going to get over a brain cancer? And as you know, like we talk about, you hear all the stark things, the bad things. It's not like you see people saying, hey, I've had breast and brain cancer and I've lived this long life and I'm doing well. You know, you see all the sad things. So I think that glimmer of hope I may have had with my initial diagnosis faded some with the stage 4 diagnosis. And then it just became about living moment to moment, day by day, for graduations and field trips, and small things mattered at that point, which I think I'm also grateful for in that sense, that I started to take more time to recognize the importance of small, intricate moments versus the big picture.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk now a little bit about side effects, because when I asked all of you this question, I got a variety of responses around the types of side effects that you experienced. And Deb, why don't we start with you? I know you talked a little bit about some of the side effects of Taxol. So if you could share some of the side effects you experienced and how you coped with them.
So I did 16 weekly Taxol with Herceptin and Perjeta, and I feel like I was prepared for the Perjeta side effects. I was told about those, but I was not properly prepared for neuropathy and leg cramps and leg pain, and that's something that I struggle with. Even right now, I want to touch my legs so bad. They hurt. That has been my long-term struggle. At first, I ignored it. It didn't come on during active treatment. It was like a delayed effect. It kind of came afterwards, so it took me by surprise. And those side effects, you know, the leg pain, the feet pain, the numbing, the hands and stuff, is what pushed me to find other people. Because I felt like I was kind of going crazy. I was like, I can't be the only one that's feeling this way. And it was so validating when I finally, you know, got out of my whatever I was in and started meeting people, and they're saying, yeah, me too. You know, and so, but it is something I struggle with. Nobody's given me anything like really useful to deal with it. I go to a pain clinic that was so hard to get into just to go get something that doesn't even work, gabapentin. So it's just, and you learn to live with it, right? But it's annoying. Like, it could be worse though, I guess, you know, and I don't like when people say that, but I just said that, so yeah.
How about you, Thomasina? You shared the few side effects that were really impacting your life.
Yes. The first one, well, the worst one kind of to me was just listless and tired. Like, I can't even describe what tired is. That's something that you do not want to experience, and I hope a lot of people don't, or no one does. And with me, I was told that in 7 days my hair was going to fall out. So I forgot for some reason, and then I had these like big braids, and I went into the mirror, and it was literally hanging off my head, so I just shaved it all off. So that was terrifying for me, but well, it teach me now not to worry about hair that much anymore, because I shaved it 3 times, so like, and I used to be stressful about that, but not anymore. And just really mostly the tiredness, the neuropathy, as she described it, is unbearable. It's like in your fingers, in your toes, and when I was taking Taxol, my fingernails started turning black. Yes. But it stopped because they told me to like soak it in vinegar or whatever. That's what scared me, because I thought they was gonna like lift off, but they never did. So that was like one of the worst side effects that I had.
Thanks for sharing that. And Sheila, you talked about bone pain, which is really, really common on some of the hormonal therapies. Can you share a little about that?
So it's interesting because last December we had a few rainy days. I live in Florida, and there were a few rainy days, and it was a bit cooler than usual. And I was walking like an old lady around the house, and my poor husband looks at me like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Everything hurts." So I do have osteoarthritis because of letrozole and some joint issues, but it just became a little bit more noticeable when it's cold and rainy. So for me, that was a bit different and difficult. The other piece, the joint pain, and I didn't really figure out that it was the meds until much later. But about probably a year and a half in, I was going to shut off the alarm and sleep on this side of the bed, and I'm just trying to do this, and it's like I can barely move the arm. It hurt, and I had to go like this to make it get there, and I had barely any strength to push this snooze button and it went on for a while, and I don't like to just kind of conceal the pain. I don't like to take more medicine that I necessarily have to, but that's how I actually started exploring things like acupuncture, and it helped quite a bit. So not something I like or welcome, but considering the long list of side effects on Ibrance and letrozole, I'm fine. So other than that bone pain and the joint pain, neutropenia, it's what I typically experience the most. So again, just keeping an eye on those blood counts. I do have some osteoarthritis, but that's about it for now. And the hair thinning. And my hair is just, the consistency is weird and different, but again, it's fine. And the other thing that I found funny, when they say hair loss, you think hair loss like on your head. My hair didn't really fall on my head. There's no hair on my arms or legs. And it's just weird, just nobody told me that. The other thing, and I know that because of the hormone blocker, obviously they're trying to suppress the estrogen. The only surgery I ever had was to remove my ovaries and tubes so I could start the treatment because I needed to be menopausal for it. Ladies, if nobody ever talked to you about what happens when you get thrown into menopause and all you knew was hot flashes, ask your doctor. And I will not go into too much detail, but if you are intimate with someone or if you're feeling things that are different on your pelvic floor, just talk to your doctor. Nobody ever did. And in my opinion, it was one of the biggest misses that I just wish someone had told me, that I felt like I was not imagining it, I was not being a wimp, and I just didn't really know that it was just being thrown into menopause and then just continually being suppressed of the hormone. So it's still a big gap, but at least I know better now, and I'm sharing this with you. So, but yes.
Can I speak on that? So I have a new normal that I sometimes will forget, but it happens once a month. Around my cycle, I'll start to get headaches, and it'll be on the side where I had my brain surgery. So it kind of scares me when it happens, but I have to remember, okay, this is your new normal, that you get this pain. And also I get arthritis pain when the weather changes and stuff like that. But I'm also like in my 40s, so I'm like, okay, is this just the older age thing happening? Or is this related to treatments and stuff? All of that, yeah.
I'm curious whether any of you, upon your diagnosis or through time, were offered supportive care or palliative care.
Should we laugh?
Okay, that was a little bit of a leading question.
I will share my experience. So I always remember every visit, they always gave you like the little questionnaire to see how stressed you are. Technically, the way I see it, are you trying to screen myself to see if I want to kill myself? No, I don't. But I mean, technically, that's their leading into like, do you want to see a social worker? I knew there was psychologist, etc., but nobody really ever offered those services to me. Because I haven't had to deal with severe side effects, I think that when you're on that thread, you probably are not offered, again, like I said, information is gold. I just really didn't know that there were other types of services available to me. And many people are, it's palliative care, it's not hospice. And I think that's a disservice. I probably started seeing the psychologist at my cancer center maybe around the middle of COVID. And it was mostly because I just really felt the need to talk to someone that could help me through, I'm okay, but survivor's guilt for me is terrible because I do not experience many of the things many of you brothers and sisters do. And I know that it's not my fault, but it's really hard to deal with at times. And dealing with news of progressions from some of my friends or seeing so many just go too young. For me, that is very difficult to deal with. And because I still need to keep the house together, because I'm still kind of like the CEO of the house, I need to keep work full time. For me, that was my lead in into starting to see the psychologist, just to see how can I deal through these things, and how can I start just trying to get more mindful and focused, because I want to do 10 million things at times, and that's not very helpful.
Thomasina, I saw you nodding while Sheila was talking about survivor's guilt and wondered if you wanted to add something
sure.
there.
I still have it. I have that all the time, especially like at the beginning. If I knew someone that was diagnosed after me, or a friend, a friend's relative, and then they would die, then I would feel like bad all the time. So I had to kind of like talk to someone to kind of get over that. And I think, I always have that compassion, so you're going to feel sorry. But it was a bit much for me. I was like I think the lady that was speaking yesterday about allow it sometimes, but that it happens, and sometimes you feel weird. Like, I don't even know that person sometimes, but it's like you still feel it. I feel it. And then also with the palliative care, I wasn't actually offered it, but I kind of requested it, because I started feeling like when I stopped working, after about a year when I was home, I started feeling like just weird and just not like myself. So I didn't feel right. I think it was like for a couple of weeks, I'm like, let me talk to someone. And so I asked the social worker, I asked the social worker, yes, can I talk to her? Because that's who I figured I would talk to. She goes, when I told her all the information, she says, you think I should be evaluated? Because I sound like I'm depressed, and I'm like, me depressed? I'm not depressed. And I just started believing it. I'm like, I'm not depressed. And I finally accepted it, so I do have a therapist that I talk to. And I've gotten better. And if anybody ever feels out of place any time for any reason, try to seek some type of help. Like, reach out to a family member, social worker, doctor. Because before you know it, it's like you're in it and you don't even realize that you're there.
Thank you, Thomasina. And I wanted to ask Deb about this as well, because I know you talked about having bipolar disorder at the time of your diagnosis, and that mental health issues and helping people to understand is really important to you. Can you talk a little bit about how having bipolar disorder has influenced your experience having metastatic breast cancer and your ability to access treatment?
Sure. There's pros and cons. So I think that the bipolar helped in some ways, because I was in a manic episode when I was first diagnosed, so I felt like I could be my own personal savior. And I was already used to taking lots of medications. I was joking about that when I was getting ready for TSA. My entire bag is not cancer meds, it's all bipolar meds and anxiety meds. And so I have the experience. I have over 20 years experience of monitoring my illness, taking medication, going to therapy for the last 10 years and stuff. So I feel like it grounded me for the mental health part of how to handle this diagnosis. Once I got out of the bipolar high and entered the lows, which coincided with my first clear scan, I was not excited. Everyone was excited for the clear scan. I was now faced with dealing with those emotions and stuff. I have spent my entire life fighting to stay alive and to not harm myself. And now I needed to stay alive because I have cancer. So it was something like, okay, well, now I can't let the bipolar win and I can't let metastatic breast cancer win, so what am I gonna do?
Mm-hmm. You did that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that, Deb. Kathy, I'd like to turn to you. I think you have some questions that you'd like to.
Yeah, excuse me, lots of appreciation for the panel and the questions, so thank you all. I do have several questions about clinical trials. And one person is newly diagnosed and has failed on several treatments. What can we tell her about clinical trials? And another question related is, someone is stable currently, but wants to know what is the right timing for clinical trials.
I would say, obviously, I'm going to say that one of your best resources is your physician. But as a patient and a physician, I recognize that there are times where you don't feel like you have the time or space to ask questions and to get that supportive care you need from your physician. But it's still important to make those issues known. And I think if a physician truly cares for you as they should, even if their honest answer is, I don't have time now, let me table that to another time, is a respectful way to help you, while also you being respectful of the fact that they do have time constraints, and there is a reality on the other side of medicine that I'm not going to get into. But I do think it's important to use our physicians as resources, and they want to be that. I want you to know that your physicians want to be resources that are helpful, but as you know, time and money sometimes take more precedence over the care that's needed in healthcare. But hopefully people will have a comfort with having trusted physicians that do know about clinical trials that are specific for them. But as we have all mentioned, some of the best support that we've received is from each other. And having communities such as this to talk to others who have similar situations that can be helpful. I, even as a physician, have learned a lot more from these type of offerings than I have in my medical school training as it relates to stage 4 cancer. So hopefully someone else can speak to it, because I don't specifically know about certain trials that people could necessarily join, but I do know how to get the answer.
Would anyone else like to address this question?
I know there's also, again, I haven't been in a trial, but I also know that there are various organizations that have like trial databases where you sign up and you can actually get notified when there is a match. Encourage you to just look out for those as well. I don't know them off the top of my head, but just that's where sometimes it's maybe helpful to just do a little bit of research ahead of time. So if you're able to find some of those and just bring to your doctor some questions about, I'm reading about trial XYZ, looks like a good fit. Can you help me sort through this and just put me in the right direction? Because sometimes what I found is when something unusual and new comes up, just bring it up to the doctor. It's easier to kind of cap the conversation going at times. So back to the time constraint, try to find a little bit of information about what your question is, and also types of trials, because not all trials out there are just to treat the illness. There are a lot of different trials for different things. Could be as easy of tracking your symptoms and just a new tool. So just be aware that there's trials for a lot of things. I know most of us want the clinical ones, but I would say just try to find a database and just have a conversation with your doctor, as Cheryl said.
And actually on lbbc.org, you can access Metastatic trial search, which if you put in your information about your diagnosis, it will match you with available clinical trials. You can also go to the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, and they have something called MBC Connect that will connect you with other clinical trials and potentially with other types of trials like you were talking about, Sheila. So I would encourage folks to do that. But something came up interesting in our conversation, Cheryl, when you were talking about what you learned from the community, and the person who had asked about these trials having failed you, I would hope that this is a place where the community could really help, because it's so disappointing when you join a clinical trial and then the treatment doesn't work. It's really disappointing. And all of you had talked about, in preparation for this panel, several of you talked about not knowing anyone with metastatic breast cancer for long periods of time, and that was deliberate because you weren't really sure whether you wanted to know other people with metastatic breast cancer. And just wondering if one of you would like to talk about how you decided to kind of step into the community.
So because I go through so many emotional struggles and I have a lot of adverse things going on in my life, traumas and stuff, and being a single mother and dealing with domestic violence and dealing with, being low income and stuff, I had already been dealing with so much grief in my life. So how could I possibly have space to make new friends that are gonna die, right? I didn't want to. But last year, after I attended my first LBBC conference, the virtual one, I realized I'm missing out. Like, this room is full of wonderful people going through the same thing, and I deserve to also have that fellowship and that friendship and that support and care, and use what I've learned to manage my emotions and stuff and share with others as well. And I think it's so important.
For me, it actually started as a sheer coincidence. So about 5 years into the diagnosis, I was at a church event. The vendor next to me, I overheard her say she had MBC and she was on the exact same treatment I was on. So I approached her, introduced myself. She was the very first person I met. So this was about 5 years in. And she asked, are you on any of the Facebook groups? I'm like, no, what Facebook groups? And he's like, oh, there's this All Florida one, and there's one for our sort of Bradenton area. So she actually added me to those groups, and that's how I started meeting people. So I met many of them virtually. The very first gathering where I actually met someone in person was at the home of one of our sisters that earned her wings probably not long after, but that started a beautiful thing. And like Deb said, I was truly missing out. So the only regret I have about not being exposed and going all in was just not having that much richness in my life, because I know nobody wants to have the illness, but gosh, how many people I've met. And it's not just you, but your families, and we are a big support. So just that Facebook connection got me then connected with other organizations. So Metaviver, and being, sharing my story during the virtual stampede. Then eventually being a board member for a bit, and learning about Light Up MBC, learning about LBBC. I learned about it, I'm pretty sure, at a retreat I attended. There's so many retreats that are just, that's where I met other wonderful friends, and learning about LBBC and leadership programs. And I think it opens doors to a lot of things that many of us wouldn't have been exposed otherwise, and so many things that sometimes you don't even think you would want to do. So I'm not a scientific by any means, but I review grants. And even though I don't understand like 95% of the science, all they want to hear is, what's your perspective? So keep doing what you're doing. For just being here, you're just giving yourself the biggest gift. And just these connections are just priceless. And just knowing people, actually, when I came here, I had someone that I had recognized, but I couldn't place her. Familiar feeling, I'm sure, for all of you. But she goes, oh my gosh, I know you from Facebook. And that's how I know many of you. So just keep opening the doors and just give things a try.
I want to add on to the give things a try. I also started going onto Facebook groups. Once I started realizing they existed, I typed into the search bar groups for women of color. And the breast cancer baddies came up with For the Breast of Us. And I had already kind of belonged to a few groups, and I was sort of like a fly on the wall, just kind of reading posts and like, okay, But there wasn't a place yet where I felt comfortable, like people knew where I was going to be coming from with my background and the things that are going on. So when I found the baddies group, that felt like home, and meeting people in there and stuff. And so I want to encourage people that are looking for a support group, you might not find the right fit. You kind of got to go into a few different groups, and you might connect with one person, you might connect with the whole group, you might belong to several groups. I know a lot of you do, because some of you know me from these groups. And just give it a shot, because once I gave it a shot, now I can't stop. Yeah. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I want to spend a couple minutes talking about relationships, because I promised we would talk a little bit about talking with young people. And I know a number of you have children or grandchildren that you need to keep updated about your health, and wondering if one of you would like to talk about how you communicate with your children about your metastatic breast cancer diagnosis. Shall we start with you?
Okay, sure. Since my children were so young when I initially received my diagnosis, I really didn't have many conversations with them about what was going on. It's only really been until recently that I've started to ask my oldest, she's 8, questions about, do you remember when I had breast cancer and going through treatments? And she doesn't. And in some ways, I'm grateful for that she doesn't have a recollection of tough times. And thankfully, through the support of my husband and my parents and our other family members and friends, they have a sense of normality that doesn't involve breast cancer. I do think at this time they're more proud of me than anything as they learn more about it, but they really have no concept of mommy could have died from this, and that mommy still has the potential to die from this disease. But my daughters say they want to be physicians one day. So we start to have conversations more about health and science and hopefully ways to help make their lives better and more worthwhile. And so I'm easing myself into those conversations as they mature. And it's a tough balance of not wanting to overwhelm them with that information, because I do want them to be kids that enjoy life and don't have the worries that we adults take on.
Sure.
My daughter was 4 years old when I was diagnosed, and like I said, I was a single mom, so I immediately took her to a therapist, a social worker in the hospital to help me, and they had like a little doll, and they did like really like simple language to help her understand. She got a tour of the hospital, except for the infusion room, no kids were allowed in there, and you know, she could understand as much as she could as a 4-year-old could. Now she's 9, right? So times have changed, so she's asking new questions now. Mom, am I gonna get breast cancer? You know, so now am finding myself, okay, well now how do I talk about this? And it is a little harder. And she's never explicitly asked me if I'm going to die because she sees me in a good place. But she does remember the trauma of me losing my hair, of me, you know, vomiting, and, you know, because it was just us. So I think that the language changes as they get older. And I've gotten married since my diagnosis, so now I have other children that are older, and they haven't necessarily asked me any questions, but I'm ready. Yeah, I'm prepared. Yeah.
So Sheila, you have older children.
Yeah, so my daughter was 12. She's in the crowd. She's going to hate me for this. But my son was 15. So when I got my news, I remember calling my husband saying, I want to, please don't tell the kids. I want to tell them together. We all piled into our king-size bed. And, we used to do that from time to time, just play along. And then we share the news. I have cancer. We're going to treat it, et cetera. Obviously, at the time, I didn't have enough details to know exactly what the extent of it was and kind of treatments, but at least they've been always aware. To this day, I go to get my labs every month and scans now every 6, and I still message them in the morning, hey, heading out to get my scan, say a little prayer for me, and then when I'm done, when it's the long day, keeping them informed. And again, I share the news. I haven't had to have the tough news conversations, but they're aware that I'm still in medication and every day, and that there's that routine. I think for me, the more important thing is just sharing with them. Again, you can still do something out of the tough parts, and even more especially for younger women. I know that some of you have said have had the experience of being dismissed. It's also part of something that I want to just take back and just, educating the younger women and the younger folks that, don't get dismissed. Just learn about this so that you're aware and ask the questions. So I think that along my journey, because of my current situation and just continuing in the path I'm in with no evidence of disease, it's just making sure they see there's still something you can do about it as well, and just educate and awareness and advocate.
Thank you.
My daughters one was like 17, so it was not so hard to tell her, and the other one was older than that. But I had a grandson, he's going to be mad because I'm pointing at him too. He was 7 years old. He's now 25, so he was telling me, like, I was 7 years old when you was diagnosed. I'm like, really? Yeah. I'm like, I didn't know that, but I guess my daughter told him, but I didn't know that she did. So when he came over, he sat down, like, what's going on? So I'm looking at him like, what is he talking about? So he said, I heard you have cancer. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, you told him? She said, yeah. So I told him as much as I can for his age, but he's very, he wanted to know. He was ready for, like, okay, so it's going to be okay. And then one time when I shaved my hair, I guess my scarf came off, and he saw it, and he goes, Alma, your hair looks beautiful. And I was like, well, thank you. And I used to be worried, worried about how it looked. So it was easy to kind of like tell him, because he was able to accept it. I just told him in the way I can for a child. But I believe LBBC have information and books like that on how to tell your children about cancer.
We do. We have some resources on lbbc.org and our Reading for Reassurance program. Kathy, did you want to ask a question now?
Yes. Here's the question, a direct quote. I struggle with the fear that every single symptom that pops up in my body is a recurrence. How do I get out of my own head?
Keep living. Just keep pushing forward. I think that's common, and we all have those recurrences of dread or concern. I don't think those ever go away, but similar to grief, you start to cope with your grief and accept your grief. I think in some ways you start to accept those symptoms over a course of time. But I don't think I mean, you've been on this journey longer than me, but I don't think there's ever a time where you don't have at least instances where you have fear or worry about your symptoms. At least I still have those concerns.
I do. However, I'm so used to it. It's like I said before, it's like it is what it is until it ain't. It's like, what can I do? But if it's here, it's going to be there. And but everybody's, everybody's different of how they are able to finally do that, if they can do that, like to block it out and do other things that make you happy, and do things that make you happy and try to enjoy your life and try not to think of it because you're going to think of it, but just try your best not to. Like not over worry too much. Right. But I think that comes with time as well.
I think another thing to think about, sometimes it's just a one-time thing. Like if I have like a sharp pain on my breast, it's like I freak out. Mm-hmm. But if it becomes a pattern, you're noticing like, okay, I'm feeling this every day, it's unusual, I would think of it as just keep a log and just kind of bring it up to your doctors. Yeah, and again, I know not all of us have, easy access every day. Most people, you can call your medical team, you can send a message. If there's something unusual and you're worried about it, bring it up to your doctors. Sometimes I forget the side effects for some of the meds I'm on, and I only have the 2. But it may be a side effect that you haven't experienced for as long as you've been on the medication, and it's perfectly normal. So I'd suggest just keep a tally of it. Again, just remember there's, every day we're getting older. It could be something entirely different. I would suggest just be mindful of it, write it down so that you can get it out of your mind, and then share it with your medical professional if you're seeing something, if you're still worried about it because it's coming back, or if it's just so unusual. Don't let that stress you, because sometimes we get just overworked about something and it may be nothing. But it's something for you. Just kind of put it maybe on paper and then bring it up to your medical team.
Yes, and my doctor also suggested that if I feel something different, because he's been dealing with me so long, like if something is, as soon as I tell him, he'll send me to check it out. That's what I like about my doctor. So it's like you can mention it to your doctor if it really feels different and you really, really feel, you know how we just have that intuition that it's really something, just check it out.
The other thing to remember, and I've had this a couple times, there have been concerns with the breast, and that's how I find out I had the cancer. There was a lump. When I brought up those concerns to my doctor, and it happened in 2 occasions actually with the physician, with the PA, she has flat out told me, I've examined you, I don't think there's any reason to be concerned about it, but if it's going to rob you of your peace and it's going to give you anxiety, I will put in the order to send you do a mammogram or send you see the surgeon. Don't be afraid to ask, because some of those professionals do give you the option. Of course I took the option because I was not going to let it. But just remember that by you sharing that information, they may offer you something that may actually even put you more at ease. And sometimes just kind of additional testing may be answer to it. Sometimes it may be a conversation on, let's just monitor and just come back to it later if it continues.
I wanted to add to that. I think what I'm hearing in the question is, what do you do in the moment of that anxiety when the feelings are rushing towards you and stuff? And Sheila said being mindful. Mindfulness is one of the tenets of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a program that I'm doing, and it's kind of like re-taught me different ways of coping with things. And so I think that one of the things could be like, just really being mindful. And I'm having all these thoughts. Of course I'm having these thoughts. I have metastatic breast cancer, and just looking at the thoughts and letting it float away and letting it just be a thought, because that thought is not fact in that moment. You don't know, right? You're just feeling this way. Of course I'm feeling this way. I'm gonna be okay. Like invalidating yourself and stuff, and maybe taking those deep breaths and calming yourself down and stuff, and just kind of taking it step by step, because it is very overwhelming to be so anxious that you get into a panic attack. So you take these steps and just be really gentle with yourself. Like one thing that I've learned is having compassion for myself, and it's something, be gentle with yourself. Just be gentle. Yes, you're feeling anxious. Yes, you're having a lot of fearful thoughts. Yes, it's overwhelming, and it's okay. Take it one by one.
Thank you for that. So this has been a very fast hour, and unfortunately, I have to ask my last question. So I'll address this to each of you. When you think about the key pillars of what you do to cope with living with metastatic breast cancer, what are the key words that you would share with this community about how you cope? And I'll start with Thomasina.
Love, like loving myself and taking care of myself. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. And taking care of myself, taking time out for myself. Allow yourself to cry if you want to cry. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter. Don't try to stop it, because I learned to do that also. And I'd also say advocacy and community, helping each other. Because when I did, first, when I realized I did have cancer, that's what I said to myself after a while, why do I have it? I didn't say why me, but why? I said it must be God wants me to do something, like give information. So I realized I'm supposed to give information and share to help other people. So instead of just, I never really felt sorry for myself, I don't think. I don't remember, I don't think I did. But I always wanted to advocate and help. But I wasn't able to. I was too weak. So once I was able to be strong enough, then I signed up with Living Beyond Breast Cancer to help everybody out.
Thanks, Thomasina.
You're welcome. And I'm enjoying that, and so, yes.
Sheila?
Faith, family, community, advocacy, so an extension of Thomasina's, but also gratefulness. There's a lot to be grateful for. And I try to find that beauty on, it could be as simple as, okay, I woke up today, I can listen to the birds singing. And I think that gratefulness that just empowers you to just live through that next hour, that next day, and share that with others. It's incredible how living with an attitude of gratitude does for you, but also for the people that are around you, because they can actually get to see that they can live through it with you, and they can just do beautiful things with whatever they may be dealing with as well.
Deb?
A purpose, like finding purposefulness in life and using the experience and stuff. I know that sometimes it's dismissive when someone says everything happens for a reason, but for myself, I feel like, okay, I don't know why this is going on, but I'm going to take this experience and use it for something good. You know, and I've always been an advocate for social justice issues and different things, so now I'm just shifting it to breast cancer advocacy. I have experiences to share. This is my purpose right now. If I'm going to live with this illness, then I need to do something with it and build community and continue advocating.
Cheryl?
It's simply love for me as well. I think love covers a lot of things. It helps you in your most vulnerable times. It helps you when you're up. It helps you when you're down. It helps you care for others. It helps you care for yourself. And I wouldn't be here without love. I don't think any of us would be here without it, and it sustains us. That's it.
Thank you so much. Let's applaud these amazing, amazing ladies.